All right. Well, yesterday we learned about huge scandal in the Trump administration had to do with Pete Hegseth and the national security team, including Vice President J.D. Vance, sharing wartime plans in Yemen and with the Houthis with a journalist, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic. They accidentally plugged him into this group chat. This is insanity. What's going on? It's not what you're hearing, obviously. There are some questions that need to be asked about this, but we've already gotten most of the answers to them. And there is a scandal here, but it's more of a journalistic scandal, actually, than it has to do with our Secretary of Defense and our National Security Advisor. First, let's look at how the media first framed this story. You're Jeffrey Goldberg. You get this huge blockbuster with The Atlantic. You publish it, and where do you go first? Well, of course, you go to Jen Psaki on MSNBC.
Responsible here and not disclose the things that I read and saw. I will describe them to you. The specific time of a future attack, specific targets, including human targets, meant to be killed in that attack, weapon systems, even weather reports that the government is I don't know why Hegseth was sharing it with everybody. I mean, the precise detail and then a long section on sequencing. This is going to happen. Then that is going to happen. After that happens, this happens. Then that happens. And then we go and find out if it worked. I mean, he can say that it wasn't a war plan, but it was a minute by minute accounting of what was about to happen.
Okay. It wasn't a war plan, he conceded. It was just a minute by minute accounting of what was about to happen, but he can't show that to you because he's being responsible. But trust him. After all, he's Jeffrey Goldberg. Now, here was the headline that they ran with. The Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plans. But didn't he just say that it wasn't a war plan? I think that's what he just said. Hold on.
Then that happens. And then we go and find out if it worked. I mean, he can say that it wasn't a war plan, but it was a minute by minute.
See how he's struggling to figure out and how to describe what this so-called war plan was, since Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth denied this and said it wasn't a war plan. If it's a war plan, then he should just be able to say, well, he says it's not a war plan, but it is a war plan. They ran it in the headline, didn't they? Trump administration accidentally texted me its war plan, so it must be a war plan. So here's what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said after that headline ran.
Can you share how your information about war plans against the Houthis in Yemen was shared with a journalist in The Atlantic? And were those details classified?
By the way, I think that's White House correspondent Mary Margaret Olahan, friend of this program, friend of all of us. She's a great person. But see, this is how these insidious things happen. She's asking the question of the Secretary of Defense. And the question is, can you explain how these war plans got shared? When, of course, how do we know this is a war plan? We saw a look at the text messages, and it wasn't a war plan. What was detailed in the article was not a war plan. In fact, there's nothing in the article that actually fits the description of a war plan, but it's in the headline, damn it. And so now this is how this thing starts getting perpetuated, even with good reporters like Mary Margaret from the Daily Signal. So here's the question. How did your war plans? And you see Pete Hegseth starting to laugh because he knows what a war plan looks like. So here's his answer.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does. I would love to comment on the Houthi campaign because of the skill and courage of our troops. I've monitored it very closely from the beginning. And you see, we've been managing 4 years of deferred maintenance under the Trump administration. Our troops, our sailors were getting shot at as targets. Our ships couldn't sail through. And when they did shoot back, it was purely defensively or at shacks in Yemen. President Trump said, no more. we will reestablish deterrence, we will open freedom of navigation, and we will ultimately decimate the Houthis, which is exactly what we're doing as we speak from the beginning, overwhelmingly.
Why were those details shared on Signal, and how did you learn that a journalist was privy to the targets, the types of weapons used?
I've heard I was characterized. Nobody was texting war plans, and that's all I have to say about that.
Right,
Thank you.
That's it.
That is the bottom line here, because the headline, I remind you, is the Trump administration accidentally texted me war plans. He released screen images of 2 of those group chats on Signal. Here's one of them after one of the strikes against Houthi enclave in Yemen. J.D. Vance, excellent. John Ratcliffe, that's the CIA director. Good start. I do like Michael Waltz using emojis. American flag fire. Good job, Pete and your team. Team in Mar-a-Lago did a great job as well. Great work. So that is pretty damning. Everyone saying good job on Signal. I mean, this could have been after your first 2 rounds of the March Madness bracket came in. I don't think there's anything compromising there that we need to worry about. And the first point he made about the Atlantic and Jeffrey Goldberg is a valid one. I mean, after all, just take a look at some of the great journalistic work that the Atlantic has done over the last several years in defense of naked Joe Biden. Joe Biden, the most influential vice president in history. It's totally normal that Joe Biden's son works for a Ukrainian energy company. I'm not kidding. These are real headlines. Stay alive, Joe Biden. Run, Joe, run. Why Democrats need a Biden candidacy. WTF, leave Biden alone. They actually put WTF in the headline, which is more juvenile than even Michael Waltz using emojis in his Signal chat. Joe Biden's dating advice for girls. That's something that I'm going to click on. Biden gets China. Can the Times bare-chested Biden be explained? Biden tells 3rd graders Obama is really cool. Joe Biden crazy like a fox. Thank you to our buddy Mays there on the X platform are putting together those headlines to show you how great the journalism work is over at the Atlantic. Again, like I said, there is something revealing about this. There is something somewhat embarrassing about this story, and there's certainly some questions that need to be asked. Last night, some of those questions were still hanging in there. Probably the biggest one was, is it appropriate for people in the national security apparatus to be discussing anything like this, whether it's a war plan or not, on a commercial over-the-counter app like Signal, despite the fact that there are security protocols in Signal. There are a lot of people who work in government who utilize Signal for that very reason. It's much better than WhatsApp, which is just a garbage application, or Messenger or what have you. But is this appropriate? Is this right? And did this violate any protocols in the federal government? Well, that's a good question that needs to be answered, and it finally did get an answer. We'll give it to you in a second. But let's turn last night to CNN, where Scott Jennings, as usual, sort of boils down all of the hype and noise and crystallizes it into a few basic points that we should all bear in mind.
A shock inside the White House that this chat was texted to Jeffrey Goldberg. Are you shocked?
Well, sure. I mean, it's a shocking thing, and they've admitted that it was a mistake and admitted that it's authentic. So they're owning up to it. I think they're still, based on what I've heard tonight, trying to figure out how it happened. I'm not sure the National Security Advisor Walls even knows Goldberg. In fact, I don't believe he knows him and has never met him. I did learn a few things in some of my conversations, if you're interested. One is that the Signal program was preloaded on a number of devices and agency computers in this circuit when they got there. So in their view, it was already in use. Number 2, in some of the messages, they talk about needing to go to the high side computers, which is the classified system. So they clearly were knowing there was a line on what you could discuss in a chat like this versus classified system. Number 3, there is a dispute over whether the term war plans is being exaggerated. And number 4, look, I love the policy. It's well executed. You've got a thoughtful policy discussion going on. And we did what the Biden administration would not do, stop these people from harassing our shipping lanes and our boats and our Navy. So good on the Trump administration for reversing a bad policy.
So that's brilliant. And I want to start here with point number 4 there, which is who's dead at the end of the day here? Who lost their life because of this terrible scandal? And the answer is only a bunch of scumbag terrorists. Scumbag terrorists who are allowed to live under the Biden administration. Scumbag terrorists who were threatening the lives of members of the United States Navy and Marine Corps on a regular basis. And now they're dead. And all the rest is noise, because the bottom line is it's good policy and it was executed flawlessly. Point number 2, though, is very important. When you look at the text, there is conversation about, I shared X, Y, and Z information with you on High Point. or high side, I believe it is. What that means is that is a secure communication system that they use for granular detail that should not be shared on this app. They were conscious and aware that the conversation that they were having on Signal did not rise to the level of the kind of protection that you need in one of the more encrypted, secure areas. So this is a question of, and you can quarrel with it if you want, but this is a question of convenience. Listen, there's a lot of times where things are only discussed inside a SCIF, which is a specialized room that is impossible to crack into or eavesdrop or surveil in any way whatsoever. And those conversations happen at the Pentagon, they've got them, at the National Security Agency, they've got them, at the White House, they've got them. That's a thing. You know, some people who work in the administration have a SCIF installed in their home so that if they have to, they can go into a SCIF to have a private, secure conversation or meeting. Obviously, this didn't rise to that level. You've got a coordinated conversation with people across the planet. One of the members of this conversation was literally in Moscow at the time that they had this conversation. And sometimes you reach a point where the only convenient way to get people together is on a secured, but not top secret secured, texting app like Signal. And so they went ahead and did that. You also heard in point number 1 from Scott Jennings that there were devices that already had Signal installed when these people came into this administration, because this is not new. The prior administration and the first Trump administration utilized Signal for a lot of private correspondence and communications. In fact, earlier this morning, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, who was one of the people on that conversation, happened to be on Capitol Hill at a Senate hearing, and he was asked about this.
So that we're clear, one of the first things that happened when I was confirmed as CIA director was Signal was loaded onto my computer at the CIA, as it is for most CIA officers. One of the things that I was briefed on very early, Senator, was by the CIA records management folks about the use of Signal as a permissible work use. It is. That is a practice that preceded the current administration to the Biden administration.
That is correct. So there's your CIA director dispelling one of the concerns. Is it appropriate to have this kind of conversation on Signal? And the CIA director said, no, actually, we were giving guidance about this going in, and there are certain conversations you can have and certain conversations that you shouldn't have. And it seems like, looking at these text messages, that Jeffrey Goldberg went blaring out there with this headline, "They texted me war plans," which is clearly now, as we see it, a lie. That's a fake headline from The Atlantic, but we're used to that with Jeffrey Goldberg. Then this was an appropriate conversation to have. They knew the guidance and they adhered to that guidance. Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, confirmed that as well under oath today during her testimony.
Contact the defense secretary or others after this specific military planning was put out and say, hey, we should be doing this in a SCIF?
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then if
Signal
there was no
chat.
classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security. Bobbing and weaving and trying to, filibuster your answer. So please answer the content.
All right, so that's Senator Mark Warner getting really upset about this, but I don't remember him getting upset over some other things that have happened in the past. We'll get into that in just a second. Look at the Chiron, though, because this is how these things happen. Look at CNN's Chiron. Top intel officials testify amid war plans group chat fallout. War plans? They're still saying there were war plans. Can somebody show me the war plans, please? Because I missed the war plans. I ask you something. If you're a journalist, well, yeah, separate that. If you're Jeffrey Goldberg and you suddenly get a notification on your phone that you've been included into a group chat, and you open up the app and it turns out that the vice president, the secretary of defense, and the national security advisor are there talking about a strike against the Houthis, do you just lurk there and watch everything go by? Or do you say, hey, guys, I don't think I'm supposed to be in this chat. I think you made a mistake, and then leave? Now, what's ironic here is that I guarantee you, and I mean I guarantee you, that if it were under the Biden administration and it was Lloyd Austin who erroneously included Jeffrey Goldberg into a Signal chat, that's exactly what he would have done. Exactly what he would have done. That's what any normal person would have done, unless you're Jeffrey Goldberg and you're intent on lurking and trying to get a screaming sensational headline. That said, He should have never been included in this chat in the first place. And we'll get to that coming up in just a sec. But it's important to put this all in perspective first. Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma wanted to share his thoughts with the world on social media. And of course, that means he had to flip his phone vertically instead of horizontally.
I wanted to visit with you real quick about this Houthi situation. It's interesting to me that the left media is going nuts about this signal exchange between the president's cabinet and the discussion on moving forward with eliminating the threat that's been taking place. Now, mind you, they didn't say really a whole lot about the Houthis when they were attacking our warships 174 times since 2023, while President Biden literally sat in the White House on his hands like this, did nothing. Now that the Trump administration has decided to take action, instead of saying thank you for protecting our men and women that are on our ships every single day, instead of saying that, they're focusing on a signal chat. I think what it exposed, though, was the fact that there was serious discussion, even different of opinion, yet they came to the final conclusion that the Houthis needed to be eliminated because they're a terrorist organization. I, for one, thought it was intriguing to see the open conversation. I like the idea that they were actually having a discussion about it. But what I like more than anything is President Trump's cabinet, and President Trump led from peace through strength. We should never allow somebody to bully anyone, especially the United States, and attack our ships and not have to answer for it. If you punch us, we're going to put our foot on your throat and squash your neck. That's the response that had to happen, and that's what President Trump did.
That's right. And, it's funny. You really didn't hear much about the fact that the USS Stockdale and the USS Gettysburg have been under fire for over a year now, ever since October 7th. It's amazing how that October 7th terror attack suddenly gave terrorists the green light to go after American ships stationed over in the Gulf. But that's exactly what's been happening. And they've been under fire on a routine basis, having to shoot down drones and missiles coming after them. And you don't hear a damn thing. In fact, we even had a friendly fire tragedy where one of our jets coming off of the Truman, I believe it was mistaken by the Gettysburg, and it got shot down erroneously. Thank God the Navy pilots were able to bail before the missiles, before the rockets hit the aircraft and blew it out of the sky. But this is dangerous stuff we're talking about. I happen to know an officer who was assigned to the Stockdale who has been dealing with this on a regular basis. This is a young junior officer right out of the Naval Academy. You get on the Stockdale, this is going to be great. And the next thing you know, you're 6 months out of the academy and you're under fire and dealing with defensive maneuvers against drones and missiles from these dirtbag terrorists. And it went on for over a year. And you didn't hear anything. Jeffrey Goldberg didn't give a crap about that. And now finally we do something about it. And their big objection is that they were having an open discussion on a semi-secured encrypted texting message app that Goldberg should have never been included on. And if he had any integrity, he would have backed out immediately. It is interesting to see where people put their priorities. In fact, the spokesperson for the White House, Caroline Leavitt, sort of laid that out this morning. Jeffrey Goldberg, well known for his sensational spin. Here are the facts. There were no war plans discussed. So just take the word war plans out of your midst. There is nothing. You go back and look at these text messages on Signal. There is literally nothing being discussed by SecDef, by Veep, and by National Security Advisor that was not discussed openly on cable news for the last couple of weeks before the green light was given for this. Nothing. There was nothing secret about anything that was discussed there. Number two, no classified materials sent in the thread. And number three, the White House counsel's office has provided guidance on a number of different platforms for President Trump's top officials to communicate as safely and efficiently as possible. The only real breach here that one could have been concerned about was the fact that they were discussing certain matters on an over-the-counter commercial app like Signal. But now that's been responded to. That's been explained. CIA Director Ratcliffe, as you just saw, you had devices that they inherited from the prior administration that already had Signal, or new devices had Signal immediately installed because that was the protocol. And yes, some conversations can be had there. Other conversations have to be taken to a higher encrypted level. As the National Security Council stated, the White House is looking into how Goldberg's number was inadvertently added to the thread, thanks to the strong and decisive leadership of President Trump and everyone in the group. The Houthi strikes were successful and effective. Terrorists were killed, and that's what matters most to President Trump. And that should be what matters most to you. At the end of this story, who lost their life? Terrorists. That's a good thing. Spokesman for the Pentagon, Oh, no, excuse me. Congressman Greg Steube out of Florida says, while Joe Biden played possum in Rehoboth Beach, President Trump is taking the fight to the Houthis. Houthis have launched more than 300 attacks on the U.S. warships and commercial vessels since 2003. Secretary Hegseth, NSA Waltz, and the entire Trump administration formulated an effective strategy, crippling the Houthis and their puppet masters in Tehran. The end result was the Houthis finally faced some justice for the atrocities. Give me the Secretary of Defense National Security Advisor who actually stepped up and made our enemies pay for having messed up in the United States. Let's finish off the terrorists and keep America safe. Thank you, Congressman Steube. I want to hand it over to my colleague and literally best friend, Chris Tegal. He does mornings for Salem Radio Network, and he had a great segment earlier today about putting this in perspective, because this is all you see now on cable news, broadcast news, the people wringing their hands, and, squishy, spineless Republican or conservative commentators who are like, oh, this is terrible. We have to hold ourselves to a high standards. We have to listen. I recognize that we ran on the idea that there would be accountability for mess ups, right? And there should be accountability here. The only big mistake that I see is that somebody brought in Jeffrey Goldberg to the chat. And everyone's saying, oh, it's Mike Watson. I don't think the National Security Advisor is in there bringing people in on a group chat. My guess is that it was someone in his staff, chief of staff, maybe an intern in the comms department. I don't know. But my guess is that's who set up the chat. That's who made this mistake. I don't think it was Mike Waltz, but there needs to be accountability. My understanding is that he took ownership of it. He's a Green Beret after all. He apologized to the president, and the president is standing by him. All right, so don't get me wrong. We are the accountability party. But for us to hold ourselves up to a standard that the left never holds themselves up to is political suicide. All right? We don't play by the rules that they demand we play by when they refuse to play by any rules. And that's what Stegall points out here.
13 of our service personnel were killed almost right away when the Husk took over in his hasty exit from Afghanistan. A Chinese spy balloon floated over our land for 8 freaking days. You had 3 different Democrats, Governor Hochul of New York, the late Dianne Feinstein of California, and Captain Douche, the current governor representing California, all of whom worked with or were having sex with Chinese spies. That stupid old man kept highly secure, top-secret documents in his garage behind his car and at his office at some satellite campus of the University of Pennsylvania. These are just things I jotted down to myself before the show started today. How about the military ranks being thinned dramatically? We lost men and women by the score in our military. Recruitment dropped to an all-time low. Why? Many of them were run out. Do you remember why? I do. They were forced to take an experimental shot that didn't work and, in fact, now may well be killing people. A Chinese spy ring operated out of Joint Base Lewis McChord for 3 years. Did you know that? Probably didn't hear much about it. I wonder if Goldberg over at The Atlantic wrote about that.
And he goes on and on. It's worth seeing the whole video and worth downloading Chris Tegal's podcast as well. But the point is made. That's just scratching the surface on the absolute disaster that was national security under Joe Biden. And now we're meant to believe that Jeffrey Goldberg is terrified that this text was created discussing a very sound military operation in Yemen that was carried off without a hitch. All right, let's bottom line this. Number one, were war plans accidentally texted? No, there were no war plans. So that's a lie. Continues to be a lie, and they continue to use the term war plans. There were no war plans. All right, number two, should they have been using Signal for such top secret conversations? Well, it's fine to use Signal. It was part of the guidance they were given when they started at their jobs. It's certainly what the prior administration was using. In fact, you saw the CIA director say that his computer was installed with Signal right at the beginning. So, like it or not, Signal is something that they use. Number three, who let Jeffrey Goldberg into the chat? That really seems to be the scandal here. The only objectionable, problematic thing in this entire story is that somehow Jeffrey Goldberg at The Atlantic got into this chat. However, his behavior by staying there and lurking and taking screenshots and not saying anything, and then writing up a deceitful, sensationalized story about it after the fact, that seems to be the most inappropriate and frankly immoral actions in this whole story. And finally, number 4, we refuse to live up to the standard that they set for us if they refuse to live up to any standard at all. I'm sick and tired of us going after each other because we think that we can preen and take the highest ground because we have such noble and perfect, balanced and ethical positions on all issues that come our way. No, we're partisan. We tell it like it is. We're truthful. We're honest. We're frank. But we're not in a suicide pact. There's no reason why we have to beat ourselves up and start condemning ourselves because of one tiny screw up when they get away with burning the world down. I'm not going to play that game. And if you wanted to tune in and say, oh, well, you know, Larry's going to both sides this and he's going to make sure that everybody gets it from all sides. No, I don't hold myself up on a pedestal like I'm better than everyone else. No, I've got skin in this game. I believe that between the two choices we've got politically in this country, one side is decidedly superior, pro-American, pro-freedom, pro-liberty, and really stands for what our nation has always meant to stand for. And the other side will destroy us. We've seen it. We've come this close to destruction. And I'm not going to help them and harm us by making myself feel better because I can say, yes, this is awful, this is terrible, and everyone should lose their jobs. Oh, give me a break. What's the real scandal here? That a journalist was allowed into the chat. I hate it. Somebody should be held accountable for it. But there ain't no way I'm turning tail and running from the first administration that's actually been doing things for us in many, many years.